Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in this world of ours. I truly hope you're safe and sound. I'm Aaron David Miller, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and welcome to Carnegie Connects, a series of discussions and conversations on issues of critical importance to America and to the world. Today, we're going to be talking about Iran, all things Iran, and I can think of no two better guests to do this than Sima and my colleague at Carnegie, Karim Sadjadpour. So let me introduce them briefly. Sima is currently head of the Iran program at the Institute for National Security Studies in Israel. For most of her career, she served in the Israeli intelligence community. Her last position was head of the Research and Evaluation Division of Mossad from 2003 to 2007. After her retirement from Mossad, she held various positions, including deputy head of strategic affairs in Israel's National Security Council, 2008 to 2009. And then from 2009 to 2016, Sima served at the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, where she was responsible, among other things, for the Iranian file and was deputy director general. Welcome, Sima. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Karim Sadjadpour is known to all of you. He's a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, where he focuses on Iran and U.S. foreign policy toward the Middle East. He's a contributing writer at various publications, The Atlantic, frequent guest. I'm sure you've seen him on any number of media outlets, PBS, NewsHour, NPR, and CNN. And Karim provides his sage advice to any number of governments, including our own Europe and in Asia. He's also an adjunct professor at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, where he teaches a class on U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. Welcome to you both. I want to start with a frame. You don't have to agree with it, but I don't want you to. It'll be a question, but I want to save your answers until the end of our session because it points up to the issue of what, in fact, U.S. and/or Israeli policy should be toward the Islamic Republic. And I guess the frame goes something like this, that both Israel and the U.S., and they have different threat thresholds, and I don't want to assume that their policies and their tactics are going to be the same. But both Israel and the U.S. have a strategic problem with Iran, but it seems to me they really don't have a strategic solution. What do I mean by that is that the nature of the regime, its ambitions, its motivations, its regional activities offer up a possible prescription for Israeli and American policy that is pretty narrow and limiting. That is to say, it's transactional and it's temporary. I think recent decades have demonstrated there is no transformational fix to the U.S.-Iranian or Israeli-Iranian relationship. And that begs the question and highlights the cruel reality with which I think we are all dealing, and that is what to do about Iran. So let's start first with, if I can get both of your views on how you see Iranian foreign policy, particularly in the region. Karim, you've written that the view of the supreme leader is really a triad of approaches. It's an effort to drive the United States out of the Middle East, to replace Israel with a Palestinian state, and to oppose U.S. influence, not just in the region but also abroad. Give me your take now on how you see Iranian activity and how they are prioritizing those foreign policy objectives. Governing, even for the Iranians, is about choosing and setting priorities.
Thank you, Aaron. It's great to be with yourself and with Sima. As I've written in the past, I think that there have been a few governments in the world over the last 45 years that have had a more clear and consistent grand strategy than the Islamic Republic of Iran. And as you mentioned, there's three ambitions that Iran has. They want to evict America from the Middle East, to replace Israel with Palestine, and to help bring down the US-led world order. I think that they've been very committed to those end goals, although I think they realize that they're playing the long game. They can't knock out Israel with one blow. Evicting America from the Middle East, bringing down the US-led world order is not something that's going to happen in the next few months. But they have, more effectively than any other actor in the Middle East, assembled this this coalition of like-minded forces, and they call it the axis of resistance. It's essentially 5 militias in failing or failed states: Lebanon, Syria, Gaza and the Palestinian territories, Yemen and Iraq. And I think that they succeeded in what they wanted to do on October 7th. Whether or not we can say that they played a role in the planning of October 7th, they wanted to bring Palestine back to top of the agenda and to help delegitimize Israel and in the eyes of much of the world. And I think they have to be pleased with where things are post October 7th. One of the things, and I'll end here, that I say is that Iran is not pro-Palestine as much as it is anti-Israel. It's not trying to turn Palestine into Israel. It's trying to turn Israel into Palestine. And so for them, the mass Palestinian casualties are not a grave concern. What's been successful for them is how, in their view, Israel has been delegitimized in much of the world.
Again, on the issue of priorities, if geography is destiny, as it is for so many countries, could you rank order what really is, separate the must-haves for Iran from what you could call the it would be nice to haves?
So I've actually had this conversation with many of my friends who've been focused on Iran over the years, and that is to say, if the Islamic Republic was unraveling and they had to choose, okay, what are the things they compromise on? What are the elements of their ideology that they're most willing to give up? How would they prioritize those? And again, my view is that if you distill this revolution now down to its essence, there's 3 things left of it. It's death to America, death to Israel, and the compulsory hijab for women. So I think that compulsory hijab, if need be, that's something they might be willing to give up. Death to America, I think there are moments when tactically they've been willing to change their approach towards the United States, although strategically they've maintained their enmity towards the U.S. But I think the hostility toward Israel and their firm belief that Israel is an illegitimate state needs to be replaced with Palestine, I think that's probably the most powerfully felt part of Iran's official ideology, which, as long as Ayatollah Khamenei is alive and a supreme leader, my view is that they're not going to be willing to let that go.
Sima, over to you. You spent the better part of your career tracking Iranian activities in the region and maybe beyond. How do you see Iran, and how would you structure their priorities?
So first of all, I completely agree with everything Karim has said, and I just try to give some more angles to the same idea, but perhaps from another point of view. And I want to point 2 things. One, when I'm looking of what are the pillars of this regime, and there are several, I'll take 2 of them. One is the resistance to the US and Israel. And this resistance is a very important, I would say, crucial element of the Islamic Republic. And every dictatorship needs an enemy, and therefore the enemy of the US and Israel is the representative of the US in the Middle East. US is far away; they know they cannot handle the US, so they are concentrating on Israel. And completely agree with what Karim has said about that. And Israel is something that is not legitimate in the region. It is not legitimate because of 2 things. One is because it is part of the US presence in the region. And also because it is controlling Jerusalem, the Islamic, which is important in Islam, etc. But this is one angle, and I think it's so important that even if there is some reconciliation with the US, which I don't believe, but even when there was the nuclear agreement or the others, I always say it will never happen with Israel because it's so important for the regime to have this enemy and to explain everything, many things they are doing with this enemy. So that's one point. The other one is the issue of having a Shia rule of a state, of a big state in the region. The first time that there is a Shia rule of a state, and what they are now trying to show is, so first of all, because of the fact that it is a Shia, but on the other hand, there is the Saudi Arabia that is the, if you all, we all remember that one of the first things that Khomeini said when he came to Iran back, he said that Saudi Arabia is not a legitimate ruler or the one who can have the custodian of the holy places. So from their point of view, they are trying to rebuild the position of the Shia in the Muslim world, which was and is always the minority, but now is very strong. And I think what brings together these two things is that now Israel and those countries in the Gulf, and especially Saudi Arabia, are talking to each other, and perhaps they even will go to normalization. And this is a major threat. It combines the two things.
Before we move on to the recent crisis or the escalation, I want to probe a little more on the issue of the relationship between foreign policy and domestic policy. I mean, I think it was Tip O'Neill, former Speaker of the House, who said that all politics are local. And it seems to me that Iran is very risk averse when it comes to courting or creating a set of circumstances that would lead it into a major confrontation, a major war, not by proxy, but directly, both with Israel and the US. How much of that risk aversion is related to regime maintenance and the concern on the part of, I don't know how old the supreme leader is, in his mid-80s, that risk aversion is related to regime maintenance and the succession. I've often wondered about this, and I just would like to hear your views. Sima, you first.
So first of all, I think I thought the way you presented it until April 13, which I have to admit, the attack of Iran on Israel, I have to admit that I'm rethinking my position. I thought Iran was risk averting as much as possible, but something has happened. So I put it aside in a minute because probably you will get to that. And I want to say, no question that there is a very important connection between the internal politics in Iran and the external one. And I think Iran, the reason Iran wanted to improve relations with all the countries around, with all the neighbors, and on the other hand, to be less and less involved in any war outside of its borders, and especially in the last half a year, they did everything they could that the proxies will be involved, but they will not be, was because I think there is, as we all know, the main aim is to preserve the system. And I think the combination of the harsh economic situation on one hand, and then the understanding of the regime that that the big numbers of the population does not like this regime, and that's in a minor way to put it, brought them to understand that they have to limit any challenge from outside. Now, has it been changed on the 13th of April? I don't know, but I can quote an hour ago, there was a declaration of the head of the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, who said that they can repeat, if they want, they can repeat the attack that they had on Israel previously. So I think we have to rethink our evaluation. Of course, we do have answers why Israel looks to them an easier target, but I think still that it is correct to say that Iran doesn't want to be involved in any regional war. And I think at the end of the day, it might be that they miscalculated the relation between the US and Israel when they decided to do what they did. And at the end of the day, the big threat is the US.
Yeah.
And that in Iran's eyes.
It's a fascinating point to consider, and we will, whether or not that risk aversion that seemed to have characterized Iran's policy for decades may be more risk ready than we think. But Karim, over to you, because I know you've argued quite compellingly that it is regime maintenance and regime succession that, in some respects, counters the sort of revolutionary ethos that surrounds the Islamic Republic. So, is succession and regime maintenance right now creating constraints or incentives for a more active Iranian foreign policy?
It's a great question, Aaron. And Ayatollah Khamenei is going to be 85 this summer. He's the longest serving dictator in the world. And you don't get to be the longest serving dictator in the world if you rule like you're suicidal. So he's above all committed to staying in power, committed to preserving the regime. There's a wonderful quote from Hannah Arendt I like. She said, every revolutionary becomes conservative the day after the revolution because you're trying to preserve what you've gained. I think one potential explanation for what was really an unprecedented Iranian attack, April 13th, from Iranian soil onto Israel, is the fact that Khamenei is now no longer able to micromanage things perhaps as he was 5-10 years ago, given his age. And he's appointed all of these very firebrand, hardline Revolutionary Guard commanders. And my sense is that, for them, they may be much less risk averse than he is. We know that security forces in any country tend to thrive in atmospheres of insecurity, and they're certainly thinking about succession and what comes after Khamenei, and in a highly insecure atmosphere in which there's potential conflict with Israel or with the United States, they would tend to benefit from that. And one of their own was killed when the Israelis killed Reza Zahedi. So my sense is that perhaps this could be the new normal in Iran over the next year or two. It could be a dangerous situation because that ideology still very much exists: death to America, death to Israel. But perhaps Khamenei has been a constraining force over these Revolutionary Guard commanders and is no longer equipped to play that same kind of constraining force as he has been in the past.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I want to turn now to the recent crisis, the escalation, April 13, 14, and then the Israeli response a week later. But I want to begin, Sima, with you on April 1st, where the Israelis struck an annex, a consulate associated with the Iranian embassy, Iranian diplomatic presence in Damascus. I think you gave an interview to the New York Times where you were quoted as saying that you thought that Israel had miscalculated, that in effect they did not expect Iran to respond the way that it did, April 13, April 14. So I'm just curious, as an intelligence analyst, as a Mossad intelligence analyst, what kind of process do you think went into? I'm sure that there was a request for an intelligence assessment as to how the Iranians might respond to an Israeli strike. But can you take us inside the room, so to speak, and explain why you think what led the Israelis to miscalculate?
So I'm asking myself also this question. I think it's a hard question, but I think when you have such a question, which is a turning point, there is no one answer. There are several reasons together that brought to this situation. I think when I said miscalculated, I'm sure that within the room, the debate about how first of all, the issue of the relevance of the attack on the whatever it is, consulate or house of gathering of the IRGC. I just have to mention that it's not just an opportunity. Sometimes it's an intelligence opportunity that know things. I don't think this is the case. Of course, you need intelligence, but I think there is a very strong feeling in Israel that Iran is orchestrated everything in the region. We are attacked from all sides, and Iran is sitting quiet and sure and trying to threaten everyone in talking, but doesn't pay any price to what it is doing vis-a-vis Israel. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, this guy that was in Damascus is not just, of course, he's not a diplomat. He's an IRGC officer, a high-ranking officer, and he was the one who was responsible for every attack that was happening. He was talking every day to Hezbollah and to the Houthis and to the Iraqis, and he is the one who is also responsible for 3 Americans that were killed in Jordan months and a half or 2 months ago. So is the guy that actually organized all the attacks. So from the point of view of whether it was needed by and recommended by the army, no question, I'm sure it was. I wasn't there. I'm many years out of the system, but I'm sure it was recommended. And the question of retaliation, I think, I'm sure someone has raised this possibility, but at the end of the day, Israel has done a lot of things that it admitted and a lot of things it didn't admit. Also, this last event in Damascus, Israel didn't take responsibility, but there were a lot of events in the past, and I think the accumulation of the response of the Iranians and what you have mentioned before, the risk averse that characterized the regime. I think this all together and the importance of the people, of the person and the surrounding, all this together brought Israel. It's in a journal, when you write it, it's a miscalculation. It's one word, but it's much more than that. It's not that nobody was thinking about this possibility. I think when you put all the elements on the table, the upper end was to those who said, let's do it. It's important for our security on one hand, and we can manage the response, hopefully not directly from Iran.
Right. So, but would you say the Israelis were in fact surprised by what happened April 13/14?
They were not surprised because Iran was saying that it's going to retaliate and because everything. But if you ask yourself, if I ask myself whether they thought when they decided to do this attack in Damascus, whether they thought it will happen, I think no.
Yeah. One other question, and then I want to get Karim's reaction. Do you suppose that October 7 and the question of deterrence, the fact that both the Israeli intelligence, the political establishment, failed to understand that Hamas had both the motivation and the capacity to do what they did? Does the shadow of October 7, is it cast over other fronts now? And does it inform and shape Israeli policy?
I think it's, I think, let me say differently. Israel was dramatically surprised. All the failures that could have happened on the 7th of October, no question about that. But I think the quick capability of the Israeli army to reorganize itself and to start an attack and to do everything that we are doing since then in the north and in Gaza, I think shows that Israel is able to. There is one thing to be surprised with what happened on the 7th because you didn't do anything that was needed to do in order to do it, in spite of the fact you had information and everything. A long story. And it's another thing of how you react and how you operate later. And I think, but what I think, and I didn't mention before, is of course when you look from the Iranian point of view, there is an accumulation of things that they believe that Israel will not escalate to a full-scale war. And that was the reason that they decided to do what they did. They got also messages from the US, from the Europeans, and I admire the US and especially President Biden for what he is doing for Israel in the last half a year. But having said that, I want to say that the way the West is talking with Iran is in a way accepting, and especially in this specific event, I think was perceived by the Iranians as accepting the legitimacy to retaliate, but do it in a way that will not escalate to a full-scale war. And from Iran's point of view, I think they understand that there is no reason for that the US doesn't want a war. The US doesn't want to be involved in the war. There is a year of elections. So they understand that all this together supports their position and they could take this risk of attack.
Karim, to you, how actually, let's turn, unless you want to comment on April 1st and why this attack was so sensitive with respect to Iran.
Yeah. Let me just say one thing on that, which is, I think based on precedent, it wasn't necessarily an Israeli miscalculation, and that, think about it. The United States assassinated Iran's top military commander, Qasem Soleimani. Iran's response was fairly limited. Israel assassinated Iran's top nuclear scientist, Fakhrizadeh, while he was driving in his car in a provincial town in Iran. He was seated next to his wife. His wife was unharmed, but there wasn't really an Iranian retaliation against Israel. Israel taken out numerous senior Revolutionary Guard commanders in Syria. There wasn't an Iranian retaliation from Iranian soil against Israel. So I don't think it was necessarily miscalculation. I think it could be that, I go back to what I said earlier, that there could be a new dynamic in Iran, and that you have Revolutionary Guard commanders who are asserting themselves much more under an 85-year-old supreme leader.
Let's turn now to Iran and April 13/14. I have two questions for you, and Israel's response. Number one, to you, Karim. Did the Iranians have an alternative to April 13/14? And if not, why take the risk of violating what was clearly an acknowledged red line, quote unquote, by both sides, of attacking Israel directly? And number two, when you launch 350 high trajectory weapons, even if you telegraph in advance, even if you message and signal that this may be our only response, that it'll be constrained, that we're not launching against civilian targets, presumably. Could you have been certain and sure that Israel's multi-layered defense would end up preventing 99% of these high trajectory weapons from even entering Israeli territory? There was risk in this, no?
I agree with that, Aaron. And I don't want to pretend to be a military expert, but the military experts I've spoken to and folks at the White House say, listen, 100 ballistic missiles is not performative. There is nothing symbolic about that. They're not launching air balloons. In my view, there was three intended audiences for Iran's direct attack against Israel. Number one, obviously, is Israel. The worldview of Ayatollah Khamenei is that whenever you're being pressured and bullied, you should never take a step back, because that's not going to mollify the threats against you. That's going to project weakness and invite even a more aggressive response. So he wanted to retaliate against Israel, or the Revolutionary Guards wanted to retaliate to set that precedent. Number two, I think, I believe that Iran always has these parameters of a response, and that if they don't respond sufficiently, they lose face. If they respond too aggressively, they could lose their heads. Mm-hmm. And I think in particular, the folks with whom they didn't want to lose face is the Arab street and the Arab proxies. From October 7th to the present, it's the Palestinians who have been sacrificing. They've given up tens of thousands of their citizens. Hasn't been Iran, and Iran's proxies have been fighting against Israel much more aggressively than Iran itself. So I think they wanted to save face with their proxies. And the third audience for the retaliation, I think, is their own population. Like any dictatorship, Iran wants to be feared by its population. And over the last months, Israel has been, over the last years, they've taken out senior Iranian officials, Revolutionary Guard commanders in Syria, and Iran really hasn't responded. And I think they wanted to, in some ways, not only restore deterrence against Israel, but restore deterrence against their own population.
Sima, any thoughts on
I
Iran?
agree with the last sentence that Karim said about their own population. I think it's very, very important, and I'm not sure we know how to calculate it, but parallel to the attack, what we see in Iran is a huge crackdown on hijab, on the issue of hijab, in a way we didn't see it before, and it started immediately after the attack.
So there was concern. In other words, why launch this crackdown, which did occur immediately after the crisis? This was after the Israeli response, correct? Or did it occur before?
It occurred before and continues. And I think it is part of what the regime wants to show the population. Mm-hmm. You will fear us. You will continue to fear us. Look what we are doing to the Israelis and what we are doing to the people. This is something that is no question. I see a connection between the two.
Let me ask both of you for your key takeaway in the wake of this recent escalation. Is there a, quote, new normal? I mean, I ask that question only because both sides managed to strike one another's territory. Here's the paradox, I think. I mean, we were on the cusp of World War III, figuratively speaking, in the region, and both sides managed to attack one another's territory and overtly claim responsibility for it, and yet it did not lead to an escalation. Now, what is the conclusion from that? Is the conclusion that we can be risk ready in the future? Or has it created a degree of risk aversion that we went to the edge, but we both realized we didn't want to cross that line? What's the major takeaway for each of you on the recent crisis? Karim, to you first.
Well, my kind of big takeaway is that when you look at this conflict, Israel and Iran, through the prism of military power, then obviously Israel is Goliath and Iran is David. Israel is far superior. If you look at it through the prism of geography, then Iran is Goliath and Israel is David. And Iran is closing in on Israel with these numerous proxies. And I think we were fortunate that April 13th didn't further escalate. I don't think that's the end of it. I think this is a pause. And as long as this, as I said, this leadership is in power in Iran, they're very, very much committed to their ideology. I think the great danger is not necessarily, it's not Iran launching all it can from Iranian soil. It's Iran giving the orders to Hezbollah to unleash Hezbollah. I think that's the really grave danger. And I don't think we're out of the woods yet.
And, that's the geographic, you talked about geography. That's the geographic advantage, the proximity advantage that Hezbollah offers and provides Tehran. Sima, what's your main takeaway from what we witnessed over the past several weeks?
I agree that when it comes to the military aspect, it looks that Israel is stronger, but it's correct. But Israel is so occupied now in the south and in the north that it is a little bit. It's a little bit different than if Israel was not occupied on other borders. So that's one thing. The other one is. the question will be whether Israel is now more limited in its activity in Syria. And actually what Israel is doing in Syria is something that has been said from the beginning when Iran started to be involved in Syria, that we will not allow Syria to become second Lebanon, meaning another Hezbollah organization, militias and everything, and the others built on our border with Syria. And I think Israel is not going to change this decision. It's a very important security element, and therefore I think whenever we'll see Iranian tracks coming with arms or airplanes or something, if we will have intelligence, I think Israel will strike, because we are not, there is a huge criticism in Israel against the fact that we allowed Hamas to get to the point where it was on the 7th of October. And the same criticism is on Hezbollah. How did we allow Hezbollah for so many years to get to a situation where it has more than 150,000 different rockets and missiles and UAVs? So Israel will not allow any such an establishment in Syria. So I think this will be one of the elements of measuring how things will develop. So that's one element. And the other one is Hezbollah. It's interesting to follow what happens with Hezbollah. On one hand, no question, it is the most close ally of Iran. And I always say it's not only an ally, it's part of the Iranian security establishment. They use Hezbollah when they need someone to go to the Houthis and teach them how to maintain things, arms and others. They use them in Iraq. Hezbollah is not only ideologically very close, but it is also, they are Arabs, not Farsi. They speak Arabic, not Farsi. So they are very close ideologically, and Nasrallah became very important. But at the same time, Nasrallah has his own interest in Lebanon, and Lebanon is in such a situation. It's not a chance that it's not by chance that he decided not to get fully involved in the war with Israel. And I think also within this attack on the 13th, we saw Hezbollah operating, no question that he sent missiles more than before, but not beyond the parameters of what he was doing before. Also, only bigger numbers, but not to Tel Aviv or to Haifa or something like this. So within the parameters of what is happening in the last half a year. And I think at the end of the day, and this will be one of my biggest questions when everything is finished, and we'll see how it is finished. Did we see the limit of the Iranian capabilities in using its proxies? Or is it a ceiling glass that what we saw that Iran doesn't have actually all the capabilities that it thought before that it has? And this is an important question, because this will be one of the questions that Iran will put before itself, because before the war, Israel knew that Hezbollah is something that Iran can use, Hamas and everything, and now it happened. All borders are operational, not fully, but operational, and we manage it.
You know, I asked myself the question, when was the last time a non-nuclear power attacked a country with nuclear weapons?
Well, when Iran attacked Pakistan.
And Iran attacked Israel.
Yeah.
So the question is, to both of you quickly, if Iran had a nuclear weapon, deliverable nuclear weapon, not just enriched fissile material to make them, but an actual bomb, would that have changed Israel's calculations in terms of its military response? Just a question. We don't have to go there. It's intriguing though.
Right.
So the final 5 or 6 minutes, I'm at a loss now, because this strategic problem with Israel and the U.S. has with Iran does not appear to me to have any sort of transformational solution. It's a bunch of temporary, tactical, transactional sorts of instruments with respect to Iran. If you had to summarize, and you're each going to give me different answers, I suspect, what would be a realistic, feasible, and effective policy that each of your governments should adopt toward Iran? What would it be? Karim, let me start with you.
There's always going to be an asymmetry between the United States and Israel when it comes to Iran, because Iran poses a legitimate existential threat against Israel, doesn't pose that existential threat against the United States. So that's going to be a source of tension. Second, Richard Haass wrote a wonderful book called War of Choice and War of Necessity. This is a war of choice for Iran to be at war against Israel. I don't believe it's a war of choice for Israel. I think if you were to ask Israeli leaders, what is your dream? What is your ideal relationship with Iran? They would say, we would love to have a normal relationship, a normalized relationship with Iran. If you ask the Islamic Republic leaders, what is your ideal outcome vis-a-vis Israel? They would say, we want to end Israel's existence. We want for there to be a one-state solution. And as long as this government is in power in Iran, whose organizing principle is revolutionary ideology, not the national interests of Iran, I think at best we can just contain and deter them. But there's not, as you alluded to, Aaron, going to be any quick fixes or transformations. But I do believe that Iran and Israel are unnatural adversaries. This is not like Russia and Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, or China and Taiwan, where there are border disputes or resource disputes that are natural. I think that these two countries actually have complementary national strengths, complementary national interests, and there will come a day when there is a course correction inside Iran and the country puts its national interests before revolutionary ideology. And I think that will be a game changer for the region, for U.S. interests. But as Shimon Peres has said before, the good news is that there's light at the end of the tunnel. The bad news is there's no tunnel. I can see Iranians aspiring for that, for the regime to put their interests before revolutionary ideology. But at the moment, that's not in the horizon.
Yeah. Sima, over to you.
I'll say, first of all, I agree completely. I could say the same. I'll say one word about if you look on what happened in the US in the last decade or more, with the three last presidents, you saw everyone coming from the Democratic or Republican, everyone wanted an agreement with Iran on the nuclear issue, because everybody understood that there is the other option is worse than an agreement. And even Trump, when he left the agreement, what did he want from Iran? He said, let's come to the table. We'll have another agreement. You will flourish. I'll assist you economically and everything. Biden came to the White House. He said, let's go back to the agreement. We'll have after it longer and stronger. And this is what the U.S. wants, and I can understand it, of course. Israel doesn't believe. First of all, I thought the agreement, even though it had a lot of loopholes, it was for a while it was a good thing. But at the end of the day, Israel doesn't believe that this regime that is so anti-West and anti-Israel specifically is willing to suffer and to pay all the prices that it is paying for its nuclear project in order to stop it. So there is a huge mistrust on the side of Israel, and this comes to now it's even sharper than it was before. If we listen to what is happening in Iran, so many people, including someone who was the head of the Atomic Energy Committee, talking about the capabilities of Iran just to make a decision, a political decision, and to have a nuclear bomb. So I think there is I don't see any way of trying to come to terms with, because this would be the best way to do, is to come to terms with the regime that will understand that having a bomb is more dangerous than not having a bomb. So we don't know how to bring them to this. And I think one last sentence, that what happened in the last 2 years with the connection between Russia and Iran, and the support of Iran to Russia in Ukraine, and the relations with China and Shanghai and BRICS and all, gave the Iranians the feeling that they are a growing superpower, and that the luck is with them. And this is a very dangerous situation, especially if we combine to everything we said before.
Yeah. Why should we be surprised that this conversation is ending like so many when it comes to this region, where there are no comprehensive, definitive outcomes, most anywhere. And for the United States, we're stuck in a region that we can't transform on one hand, and we can't extricate ourselves from on the other. And that means looking for some sort of balance, containment, maintenance, and that's unfortunate. Listen, I want to thank the two of you. It's been a very rich discussion, and we'll have you back for sure, hopefully not in the wake of another escalating crisis. But thank you for coming, and to all those in Carnegie Connect land, thank you for tuning in, and we'll do another session this month, which I think is going to interest you. Take care and be well.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you. Thank you very much.